Hey, thank you for joining me today. My name is Vince. We are going to be doing a study from a Hebrew Christian perspective, a first century Jewish perspective on how they might have understood Isaiah 55. The chapter happens to be one of my favorite. It uh, probably is my favorite, to be honest with you. And we are going to focus on initially the first 5 verses, and then at a later time we'll finish this off. I've titled these first 5 verses "Coming to the Waters of Mercy." The theme of Isaiah 55 overall, it shows how God gives everlasting mercy to the nation of Israel. But it's a very, very important chapter to look at from a Jewish perspective because it was written to Jewish people. It was specifically for the nation of Israel, and it was specifically written over 700 years before the ministry of Christ. So when we look at what we are studying, we are going to see similar principles that we see today in the New Testament applied during the Old Testament period. So I hope you'll hang in there with me because this is an exciting chapter of the Bible. The first 3 verses of Isaiah 55 I've labeled as the availability and accessibility of mercy. The verses read, Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. You who have no money, come, buy and eat. Yes, come, buy wine and milk without money, without price. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me. Eat what is good. Let your soul delight itself in abundance. Incline your ear. Come to me. Hear, and your soul shall live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you. Verse 1, we have an invite to mercy, an invitation to mercy. What we will see is this is something that starts with God. It is not something that starts with the people. We don't choose to look for God, God chooses to invite us. Now, we are going to do a verse exegesis of this first verse. I'm doing it because I want you to hopefully see how I come up with my understanding of the verse. The reason for it is the prophet uses poetry. He makes it sound pretty. There's incredible amounts of idioms and metaphors. But the interesting thing about these things that he is using symbolically, they all have literal meanings. So, looking at this first verse, we're going to go ahead and do our exegesis only in this verse in a little more detail than the other verse coming up shortly after verse 2. And the reason is, again, just to give you an idea on how you also could go ahead and interpret symbolisms within the Bible. They're all over the place. They're in visions, they're in parables, but the Jewish people that study these things use something called expositional constancy. When they recognized the meaning, it just didn't mean it in the verse. Whenever it was symbolically used, they used it over and over again to mean the same thing. So here we go. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. You who have no money, come, buy and eat. Yes, come, buy wine and milk without money, without price. So what is he doing here? Well, first of all, he's looking for attention. He's crying out like, "Hey!" It's the word "oi" in Jewish. I have a lot of Jewish friends and family members. When they use the word "oi," it's generally when something goes wrong. It's like, what? What I do? Just drop something, or did I break something? The word literally is often translated woe, but it suggests a sense of urgency. It's an attention getter. It's a crying out because something important is being spoken. It's a call for everyone who thirsts to come in this case. Many are called, but few are chosen. Why does the verse say that? It doesn't say all are called, it says many are called. So some are eliminated. From this calling, it starts the process, and it's being started by God Himself. He is the one who is initiating an invite for people to respond. Now, what is that invite based on? It's a thirst. He says, "You who have a thirst." And I understood this meaning by looking at the verses I've listed below. I'm not going to get into the verses so much, but you can look them up later. That it is a meaning of a longing or want for spiritual satisfaction. A hunger for thirst and righteousness, like it says in Matthew 5 and 6. You have a longing that something is needed and it's not there. Well, then your responsibility is to come to the waters, plural in this case. But it's interesting because water has a dynamic meaning throughout the Bible. It is given in different forms. Generally, he might talk about cisterns without water, but generally it talks about the idea of there should be activity going on there. So when Isaiah cries out, "Come to the waters," he's basically saying, "Come to where God is working." Water is presented in different usage in different degrees. For example, Revelation 12, there is a flood that goes out after the woman in Revelation 12, but the ground opens up and swallows the flood. Jesus said to the woman on the well in John verse 4, "I will give you living waters." That is flowing water. It's water that moves. We have in this chapter itself later mentioned rain and snow. So the idea behind this, he's telling them, if you're really thirsty, if you really want to get satisfied, come over here and see what I'm doing. Coming then requires taking action or a response. You must be called first, but the call is meaningless if there is no response. Then we get a weird statement: buy without an ability to pay. You who have no money, come and buy and eat. How is that possible? How can somebody buy something if they don't have the means to buy it? Well, that's Judah. That's Israel. They didn't have the means because they were sinner. Excuse me, I think we're sinners too, right? So we don't have the means either. We're not special. Well, if it didn't work for God's first point, it obviously doesn't work for us. So they did not have the means. That's what money represents: resources or means. Neither do we. But still, buying implies paying a price. What does it imply? It's not necessarily money, but it means to come out there and make a commitment to. Take action and grab it, possess it, come and take hold of it. So if we understand what he's saying, yes, come to where I'm active, come to where I am. If you don't have any money, take possession of it anyway, and then eat. Eating means to internalize. In the Bible, Ezekiel and the prophet John in Revelation ate a scroll. It wasn't talking about physically, they consumed it internally. They took what was written, and now what God had given them, they were told to put it to use. So when we see the word eat, it means to take it and use it. And so then we have wine. Now, wine we're familiar with in the New Testament because it says you don't put new wine in old wineskins. You put new wine in new wineskins, and then it tells you why. New wines is basically the doctrinal teaching or the message. So, in other words, what he is telling people here, when you come to me, you who hunger and thirst, take hold of it, eat of it. The message that I'm giving you is what you need to buy into. Then you have milk. And milk are the basic principles. Again, I've mentioned verses here so you could go out there and look at the verses and interpret them for yourself. But there's sometimes many other verses. I've just gone in there and put it to you shortly and briefly, one or two. Then the most important thing about this, verse 1, he's telling the people it's all free. It's all free. You don't have the means to buy it, no problem. You don't need anything to buy it because I'm making it available to you without money, without price. Take it. This sure sounds like the gospel to me. Now, on this slide, I didn't want to go as deep into the exegesis. I think you're getting the idea. If you don't, email me and let me know. But I wanted to get it so you at least had an idea of how I understand things. Now, I'm going to give you the exegesis here today, but it's going to be simplified. Verses 2 and 3a. Looking at verse 2 right now specifically, even though the two combined are called the promises of the everlasting covenant. We get promises in this everlasting covenant. But let's read verse 2 and then let's look at some of the metaphors. Why do you spend money for what is not bread, and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen to me. Eat what is good. Let your soul delight itself in abundance. The word abundance here is literally fatness. Okay, so let's look at some of these metaphors, and then I've written a paraphrase beneath it to help us understand what Isaiah is sort of saying. The meaning of metaphors. We already mentioned money is resources or your means. Now we have the word bread. Bread throughout the Bible is provision. Initially, when Jesus said, that his body was broken, do this in memory of me, I thought bread meant a body. House means a body. But bread literally means provision. You could find this mentioned in John 6 and Luke 24:19. You'll find it in the Exodus as well. Bread is always provision. Wages. Wages are what we earn. For example, Romans 6:23 says the wages of sin is death. We die because we sin. We uh, that's what we earned, you know, because we earned it. It's for a compensation for what we've done. Eat. Again, we mentioned this earlier. It to be internalized, to take in inside and used. And lastly, fatness or abundance is an anointing, or literally, it means that you have more satisfaction than you had before. And then I put some parallelism used in Psalm 65:11 and Jeremiah 31. So you could go look at those later when you get a chance if you have an interest in doing so. Let me give you the paraphrase of what verse 2 is saying here. Why do you use your resources for what does not provide? Why do you work for what does not satisfy you? Listen carefully to me and use that which is good by letting your soul delight itself in my anointing or my abundance. Again, continuing in the promises of a new everlasting covenant, Isaiah 55, 2, section B, and section 3a says, and let your soul delight itself in abundance or fatness. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear, and your soul shall live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you. Now, what we see here are three specific promises given it to the respondents. It's given to the people who listen and choose to seek God, what God is doing, and take hold of it. In other words, grasp it, take possession, and eat it, consume it, use it internally. Those three promises are: first, the soul can delight in abundance. You remember verse 1, it talked about longing for, thirsting for what the soul lacked. Here, the soul gets everything it needs. There is also a promise of eternal life. Your soul shall live. That is very important. This almost sounds like the gospel without Jesus, but the principles are the same because Jesus didn't fulfill them yet. We will find out about Jesus in the upcoming verses. Lastly, it says there is a perpetual oath. There's an oath here that is a perpetual significant. By the way, this is pre Jeremiah. See, Isaiah is approximately 70 years before the time of Jeremiah. When Isaiah is stepping out, Jeremiah is coming into the picture. But why it's important, it's a new everlasting covenant because he says it, I will make. The covenant has not been made yet. It's a promise that there will be a covenant that is coming that we will find out more about in Jeremiah 31:31. Now, before I go on, I'm going to invite you guys to subscribe to this channel. This way I could communicate the other part of Isaiah 55 to you. Also, if you give me a thumbs up, it'll help me get this study out to other people as well. So I would invite you to do that. And if you have a comment, please go ahead and submit it, and I will be glad to respond. Did I mention earlier that we were going to be talking about Jesus? Well, I surely hope you could see Jesus in verses 3b through 5. Why? Because this is a covenant according to the faithful mercies of David. So, could it be David the king who lived 300 years before? Well, David was very merciful. He actually would be a good example, but he's not around. The covenant hasn't been made yet. But David could be a type, sort of say, a individual that we can look at, not so much to be the individual, but to tell us what the individual is like, the similarities that David has. I really believe it's talking about Jesus. I really believe it's talking about Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach. Now, if we look at the verses, let's see if you could agree with me. It says, I will make an everlasting covenant with you, Israel. I'm going to make this covenant, and it's going to be according to the sure mercies of David. Indeed, I had given him as a witness to the people, to Israel, a leader and commander for Israel. Surely you shall call a nation you do not know, and nations who do not know you shall run to you because of the Lord your God and because of the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. Now, this is all prophetic at that time. It's written in the prophetic present tense. So Isaiah is explaining it like it's going on at that given time. But we know this is a future covenant. So if we look at the verses and we start to try to get a handle on what's going on, we find that David is put there not to be the person, but to explain what the person is like. David was merciful. So is this person. It shows in these verses the covenant operates because of favor shown to David. It is David then that is an example. I remember one time my brother's wife called him by name, but was odd. She didn't call him by his first name, she called him by his last name. You see, David here was a father of Jesus, a father of Yeshua. He was in the line of David. So he now is presented to explain things. similar to David. For example, this person who will establish a covenant with Israel yet future, first, we will note, is anointed by God. Not anybody could become this person. God had to choose him. Secondly, he's a witness to Israel. He's there to show Israel the way. He is there to be an example to them so that they would know what the Father is like, so they would know what they should be like themselves, and that is to be like him. Thirdly, he's a leader. Mostly this word here for leader is translated ruler. Notice, not a king. In Jewish thought, it's important sometimes not just because what something is said, but also what is not said. The implication here is he will lead those that come and not all. So he is a leader to the people that are the respondents to the message given here in Isaiah 55 in those first three verses that we looked at. Next, he's a commander. A commander gives direction, he gives instruction, he tells his followers what to do. So the respondents, those people that come to God, those people that put their trust in God, those people take hold of the message and it indwells in them so that they could use it. These people are the ones that he is affecting. Now, the next point we want to make is believing Israel's purpose is associated with David, or in this case, the son of David. These believers shall do something very unique. They shall call a nation. They should call a nation that they do not know. Now, when we look at the book of Genesis, we look at Genesis 10 and we have a table of nations. Oddly, they are going to call a nation that doesn't exist. It was the Jewish believers that went into the Gentile communities and developed the church. It was they who went out. They called us. God called them. They responded. They went out. They told us about God. God called us. They called us. We responded. Now, we will also notice that there it is mentioned that nations who do not know Israel shall run to them. This is a millennial fulfillment. Actually, it's not just a millennial fulfillment, but I would say it's an end of the age fulfillment. See, we know when Jesus Christ returns, certain things are going to begin to change in the final years. Right now, the nations want to destroy Israel overall. The majority of people stand against the nation of Israel. But it will be the opposite of those days. Because what's going to happen is they're going to have different reasons for seeking a relationship with Israel rather than hating Israel. The land will be given to Israel at that time. So, why are people living then after the 7 year tribulation period, after the final 7 years of this age when Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah, Yeshua returns? It is because Israel will have a special relationship with God. They will recognize that it is these people that God has chosen. And not only that, they will recognize they have a special relationship with his anointed one, his chosen. We notice that if we look at the verse 5, it talks about the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel. Then it says, for he, I want to emphasize here the word he, has glorified you. That's going to be the last reason why they want to get uh, a relationship with Israel, because God has glorified them. That special relation results in glory. But I want you to notice something specific. It's the word he. It does not say they, which would seem odd when you mention God and the Holy One. So, your God and the Holy One of Israel. Shouldn't it say they? It doesn't say they. So, there's a couple possibilities here, but maybe It's one. The focus is following the antecedent, which would put the emphasis on the Holy One of Israel, which was the last person mentioned. Or what it might be intended to do is to show the unity of God, the triune God in a sense of the way that the two here, the Father, the Son, are one. So let's move on to the final slide now. Okay, so what can we get out of these first five verses that we could use in our lives? What difference does it make? We're living 2,700 years later. Isaiah is not around anymore, and he was speaking these words to people. But I think you've already seen that there are some realities that apply to us. Now, let me state how important it is that we learn to go ahead and recognize the symbolisms that are present. You see, we're not living 2,700 years ago, but there are other Bible verses that we can look into through a concordance that will help us interpret the literal meaning. And then once we identify what the literal meaning is, we could go ahead and apply that interpretation to other Bible verses when it's used figuratively. Receiving mercy today is another thing we need to recognize. Things do not change. God does not change. If people back then who were chosen by God needed mercy, how much more do us who were not in a relationship with God need mercy? Yes, we're the church now. We do have that relationship. But let us remember there's a lot of people that need to hear it from us, just like the initial Jewish people went out and told the first Gentiles that became believers. So we have a responsibility to play it forward here. Next, the covenant prophecies only work because of the Son of David. The rest of the prophecies written in the Bible will only work because of the Son of David. It will require Yeshua, Jesus, our Messiah, to come out there and fulfill the other Bible verses that are throughout the book that we read and cherish. Now, I do not want to go away without explaining the big picture here. Because if you looked at those first five verses, you wouldn't have known this if you lived 700 years before Common Era and were living in the times of Isaiah. But it was history in the making. Because we lived 2,700 years later, we could see prophetic history developing. Now, let me just kind of explain it through a little graph I made here, and I'm just going to do it over a couple of minutes. The first three verses talked about the remnant provisions of Israel. 2,700 years now, there has always been a remnant of Israel, and it will continue on. So we see 700 years before Common Era, when recognized, it was already going on there. A person must receive, must go ahead and respond to God to be able to receive mercy. Next, we notice that the covenant was talked about being established by David, but was established at the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so for 19 over 1992 years now, we have this operative within a level where it is guaranteed a fulfillment has happened. Yet at the same time, we haven't experienced the blessing because we're looking for verse 5 to be fulfilled. And there are three things in verse 5. Well, the first thing is the church age, which started about 37 to 3900 Common Era. It started because Israel called a nation. That's us. That was the prophecy. And so the church period started at that time. Now, what's going on is the church nation is still growing. There are still more people coming into the body of Messiah. Then, at the closure of the end of this age, after the period we call the tribulation period is coming to an end, Israel will all receive God's mercy. And in doing so, they will be glorified. All Israel will be saved. And as a result of that, Gentiles who once wanted to destroy the nation will recognize the importance of Israel and the importance of their God and the Holy One, and they will enter in the Messianic kingdom. Now, my name is Vince. I want to thank you for joining me. Hope you got a lot out of the study. If you did, please give me a thumbs up so that we could get it to more people. And I would invite you to subscribe because I am going to finish the last 8 verses of this in the next week or so. And I'd love to make sure you know that it is up for viewing. Thank you again, and God bless. May He bless you abundantly and have a great week.